Okay, so today we're gonna dive into something that I'm gonna guess most people try not to think about too much.
Yeah.
Urban wastewater treatment.
Not the most glamorous topic.
Not glamorous, no. But this new EU directive, well, let's just say it's got some surprising twists. It's
Yeah.
actually way more interesting than you might think.
Yeah, it's all about cleaner water, a healthier planet.
Yeah,
It really is a big deal.
it is. So we're gonna break it all down. What's changed? What's it mean for everyone? What challenges and opportunities are we looking at? Think of this as, I don't know, your crash course in this new EU directive.
Exactly. We'll cover everything from those expanded treatment requirements to the new technologies in use, and even how this all ties into pandemic preparedness and the circular economy. It's a lot more interconnected than people might think.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the first things that really jumped out at me was the scope. I mean, it used to be just the big cities, right? Now we're talking smaller communities, even places with only 1,000 people.
You got it. That's a huge change. It means way more areas are going to have to meet these, well, let's be honest, these stricter treatment standards. Great for the environment, obviously, but it makes you wonder, is it really doable? Especially for the smaller communities that maybe don't have the resources of those big urban centers.
Yeah, just the cost alone, I imagine, could be a major hurdle for some of them.
Totally. These new treatment systems, they need infrastructure, technology, personnel. It's a big investment.
Hmm.
The directive does lay out some ways to get financial help, but it's still going to be a challenge for a lot of communities, no question.
And speaking of challenges, those deadlines in the directive, they're pretty tight.
Hmm.
First, it's secondary treatment by a certain date, then tertiary treatment, and then down the line, there's even something called quaternary treatment. Some of these deadlines are years away, like 2039, even 2045.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an ambitious timeline, that's for sure. All the member states are going to have to really step up to hit those targets. The directive does offer some flexibility, though.
Mhm.
Newer EU members, places like Bulgaria, Croatia, Romania, they get a little extra time.
Mhm.
But overall, the message is pretty clear, I think. The EU is serious about this. Water quality, protecting the environment, it's a priority.
Okay, before we get too far into all the technical stuff, there's this one detail I got to ask about. I mean, it really surprised me. So it seems if a member state, while they're building all this wastewater infrastructure, if they dig up like an important archaeological site,
Yeah.
they can actually get an extension on the deadlines. Like what? It's straight out of an Indiana Jones movie, you know? You're digging a sewer line, boom, you find a lost city, and now you've got more time to meet environmental regulations.
You're right, it is kind of unusual. But the directive recognizes that we need to preserve cultural heritage. I mean, if digging up ancient ruins is going to delay a treatment plant, they're willing to give an extension. Up to 8 years, actually. Of course, it's got to be justified and kept as short as possible, but still, pretty interesting, right? It shows how they're trying to, balance all these different things.
8 years is a long time, but hey, I'm sure the archaeologists are happy about it. But let's not forget, this directive isn't just about what we're, flushing down the toilet. Industrial wastewater is a huge part of this, and they're going after all sorts of pollutants, including heavy metals and, microplastics. Those things are everywhere these days.
Oh, absolutely. This directive, it takes a much broader approach to protecting water. It's not just our homes, it's the waste from industries, too. And you mentioned microplastics, huge problem. But this directive goes after those so-called forever chemicals, too, the PFAS. Those are in everything, non-stick cookware, firefighting foam, and they just stick around in the environment forever, which is a problem for both human health and ecosystems.
Wait, so they're monitoring for stuff that's in our frying pans? That's both, well, it's surprising and a little creepy, honestly. But I guess it shows how this stuff can get into the water from places you wouldn't expect.
You got it. And that's why monitoring is so important. They're making member states track a whole bunch of these micropollutants, especially in places where they get their drinking water. Got to catch those potential risks early and make sure everyone's safe.
Now, in some places, connecting to a big sewer system just doesn't make sense. Like in more remote areas, it could be too expensive or just not doable at all. So this directive allows for individual systems in those cases. Can you talk about those for a minute? What are they and how do they fit into all of this?
Sure. So individual systems, they're like mini localized treatment solutions. They work when hooking up to a big sewer network is way too expensive or impossible.
Hmm.
Could be things like septic tanks or small treatment plants just for one house or a tiny community.
Mm.
The directive lays out how they have to be run and kept up so they still meet all the environmental standards.
Makes sense. You got to have some wiggle room to deal with all the different situations out there. But all this fancy treatment tech, it can't be cheap. Who's paying for all this, especially when you need those individual systems?
Now that's where it gets interesting again. EU funding has helped a lot in the past, but This directive, it's really pushing the polluter pays principle, trying to make the whole system more sustainable financially. I mean,
Okay. And part of that is this extended producer responsibility, right?
right. Basically, the companies making the products that end up polluting the water, they're going to be responsible for some of the cleanup costs. We're talking pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, even your makeup. They're all going to have to help pay for quaternary treatment, which is the really advanced stuff that removes those super persistent chemicals.
So if a company makes something that pollutes the water, they got to help clean it up.
You got it. The idea is to get them to make greener products and tech from the start. You know, less pollution from the get-go. It's about sharing the cleanup costs more fairly.
Makes sense to me. And there's one more thing about this directive that blew my mind. They want the whole wastewater sector to be energy neutral by 2050. Like what? Using renewables, biogas, solar power generated right at the treatment plants? I got to be honest, I thought that was crazy at first. Is it even possible turning, well, what we flush into clean energy?
It's a big goal, that's for sure. But it's not as crazy as it sounds. Those treatment plants already make biogas as a byproduct, when they break down the sludge. And lots of plants are using that biogas for energy already. Add in some other renewables, solar panels, wind turbines. It's actually doable. You could really cut down on those fossil fuels and get to a truly energy-neutral wastewater system.
So we're talking about like completely changing how we think about wastewater, right? It's not just something to get rid of anymore. It's a resource.
That's the whole idea. It's part of moving to a circular economy, recognizing that water, energy, the environment, it's all connected, and finding solutions that are good for people and the planet.
This is a lot to take in, and honestly, we've only scratched the surface of this new EU directive. It's clear the EU is serious about water. They want a more sustainable future, but the big question is, can they actually pull it off? What challenges and opportunities are out there? We'll be back after a short break to dig into all that. Stay with us. And we're back. Still diving deep into this pretty ambitious EU directive on urban wastewater treatment. I gotta say, it's really made me think differently about, even just washing the dishes.
I know what you mean.
It's made me realize the scope of what they're trying to do here is huge.
It really is a whole different way of thinking about wastewater.
Yep.
We used to just see it as a problem to be solved, something to get rid of.
Right.
But this directive, it wants us to see it as a resource, something valuable that we can use in all sorts of ways.
It's a big part of that whole circular economy thing, right?
Exactly. And speaking of the circular economy, we were just starting to talk about reusing treated wastewater and sludge before the break.
Right.
So what do you think? What are the challenges and opportunities there?
Well, I'm guessing public perception is a big one. I mean, let's be honest, the idea of reusing wastewater kind of grosses people out, even if it's been treated and is totally safe.
Yeah, the yuck factor is definitely a real thing.
Totally. Not everyone's going to be psyched about watering their garden with, recycled toilet water, even if it's perfectly safe.
I get it. But the truth is, treated wastewater can be incredibly valuable, especially in places where water's scarce. You can use it for irrigation, industrial processes, even to replenish groundwater.
So it's not just about less pollution, it's about using water more efficiently overall, right?
Right. And this directive gets that. They want member states to come up with these national water reuse plans, set targets, and figure out how to promote safe, sustainable reuse of treated wastewater. It's about changing how we think, from just getting rid of waste to actually recovering those resources.
Okay, makes sense. But what about the sludge? We talked a bit about getting phosphorus out of it.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you can do with that, well, I'm not going to lie, that pretty gross byproduct?
Sludge gets a bad rap. But it actually has a lot of organic material and nutrients. It can be really good for the soil, like a soil amendment or even fertilizer.
So instead of trashing it, we can actually put those nutrients back into the ground.
Exactly. Closing the loop. It's a much more natural and sustainable approach. Of course, there are safety things to consider. The directive is very clear about treating and monitoring the sludge to make sure it's clean, free of contaminants before it's used for anything like agriculture.
Yeah.
You don't want to solve one problem and create another.
Right, of course. Safety first. But it's cool that even something like sludge, which most people probably just think is a pain, can actually be useful in a circular economy.
It's all about changing how we see things, finding those hidden opportunities. And this directive really makes you think outside the box.
This is way more complex than I thought at first. It's not just about setting treatment standards, it's about making the whole wastewater cycle more sustainable, protecting the environment and people's health.
It's really comprehensive. It looks at the whole system and how everything's connected. It's not just the water, it's the energy we use, even climate change.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought about that. How does treating wastewater tie into climate change?
Well, think about it. Urban wastewater treatment, it actually creates a lot of greenhouse gases, mostly methane and nitrous oxide.
Seriously, I had no clue.
It's easy to forget, but those treatment plants use a ton of energy, and when all that organic stuff in the wastewater breaks down, it releases those greenhouse gases into the air.
So how does this directive deal with that? Are there specific things they're doing to cut down on those emissions?
Absolutely. The directive says they have to monitor those greenhouse gas emissions from treatment plants, and they want member states to use technology and practices that keep those emissions as low as possible.
So using more renewable energy, making those plants more efficient, maybe even figuring out how to capture and use the biogas they're already making.
You got it. It's all part of that bigger goal of making the wastewater sector more sustainable, shrinking its carbon footprint. It really shows you how these things that seem totally separate, like water and climate change, are actually really connected.
I'm starting to see this is more than just an upgrade. It's like a total change in how we deal with wastewater.
Exactly.
It's not just about cleaning it up. It's about making the whole sector something that can actually help the environment.
That's the heart of this directive, recognizing that water, energy, the climate, and our health are all tied together. And we got to find solutions that work for everything.
It's a pretty ambitious vision, but it also gives me hope. Even in something as, I don't know, ordinary as wastewater treatment, there's room for innovation, for making things better.
I agree. But how do we know it's actually working? I mean, is there a way to track their progress and hold these countries accountable?
That's a good question. You got to be able to see if it's actually making a difference.
Right.
So is there like a system in place for that?
Transparency is key. That's what they're saying. The directive has all these reporting requirements. Every so often, the member states got to report on how they're doing, implementing everything. They got to provide data on all sorts of things, like how well the plants are running, pollution levels, even the money stuff, how much it all costs.
So there's like a checks and balances system built in to make sure everyone's actually doing what they're supposed to?
Exactly. And it's not a secret. All that info is public. Anyone can see it, citizens, researchers, whoever. So we can all keep track of how things are going and make sure our governments are doing what they said they would.
So it's not just a bunch of rules written down and then forgotten about. There are actual ways to make sure things are moving in the right direction.
Right. And if a country's not doing what they're supposed to, the European Commission can step in. They can issue warnings, investigate, even give out fines.
Wow. So there are real consequences if they don't take this seriously. This directive's got some teeth.
It does. The EU wants this to work. But it's not just about forcing people. It's also about working together and sharing knowledge. They want these countries to team up, figure out best practices, learn from each other.
It sounds like this directive is a really big deal. It's ambitious, it covers a lot, and it's got a real plan for making it happen.
It's a big step forward, that's for sure. There will be bumps along the way,
Yeah.
but the potential benefits are huge.
Yeah, cleaner water, healthier environment, using resources better, boosting the circular economy, even helping fight climate change. Seems like a win all around.
It's a vision for a better future.
Mm.
One where wastewater isn't a problem. It's a resource we manage and use.
Well said. We've talked about a lot, all the technical stuff, what it means for the environment, the climate, our health. It's been fascinating to learn about this whole world that most people probably don't even think about.
It's a world full of innovation, full of potential, turning waste into energy, using wastewater to track diseases. There's so much happening that we don't see.
It really makes you think. Even in the most unexpected places, there are solutions. We can make progress if we start looking at things differently.
And that starts with awareness, with understanding the problems and our role in fixing them.
So to all our listeners out there, think about what you've learned today. What can you do to help create a more sustainable water future?
Could be something small, like being careful about what you put down the drain, or something bigger, like getting involved in policy changes in your community. Every little bit helps.
And the next time you turn on the faucet or flush the toilet, remember all the work and innovation going on behind the scenes to make sure we have clean water. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
And we're back for the last part of our deep dive into this EU directive on urban wastewater treatment. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
The tech, the rules, all those ambitious goals. But I feel like there's one big piece missing. Oh. Besides the wastewater itself.
Yeah, even beyond that. I'm talking about the human element. We haven't really talked about that.
It's easy to forget, right?
Mm-hmm.
We think about treatment plants, pipes, all the technical stuff.
Right, we just flush and it's gone.
Exactly. But this directive Any big environmental project, really, it all comes down to people in the end.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What do you mean, the human element? What can regular people like me actually do to make this whole thing work?
It starts with just being aware. The more we understand where our wastewater goes and how it's treated, the better choices we'll make.
So, like, not pouring grease down the drain or flushing stuff that shouldn't be flushed.
Exactly. Even those little things, they make a difference. They can make the whole system run better.
So it's not just up to governments and companies. We all have a part to play.
Absolutely. And beyond just our everyday habits, we could be more proactive, support the directive in our own communities.
So, like, talk to our representatives, go to those town hall meetings about water projects, maybe even push for more funding for these initiatives.
Exactly. Make our voices heard, make sure our local leaders are making this a priority. We can also support those groups and businesses that are already working towards the goals of this directive.
Okay, so it's bigger than just following the rules. It's about changing how we think about water, about our relationship with the environment.
It's about realizing that water is precious, it's something we all share, and we have to protect it together.
And this directive really pushes that polluter pays idea, right? Especially with that extended producer responsibility for things like pharmaceuticals and cosmetics.
That's a big part of it. Holding those who pollute accountable for cleaning up the mess. It's not just about wastewater, it's about changing how we make and use stuff in general.
Well, wouldn't that make things more expensive? I mean, those companies will just pass the cost on to us, right?
There might be some small price increases, yeah, but studies show it wouldn't be much.
And in the end, it's worth it, right? If it means cleaner water and a healthier planet.
Exactly. Doing nothing, ignoring the problem, that costs way more in the long run.
This has really been eye-opening, this directive. It's not just about wastewater. It's about changing how we interact with the whole environment. It's about creating a future that's more sustainable and fair for everyone.
I like that. It's about understanding that everything's connected, that our choices matter here and everywhere.
Well, we've covered a lot, all the technical stuff, what it means for the planet, for the climate, even for us. It's amazing how much is going on that we never even think about.
It really is. And there's so much potential for positive change. Turning waste into energy, using wastewater to track diseases. There's so much innovation happening under the surface.
It gives you hope, right?
Yeah.
Even in the most unexpected places, there are solutions. We can make things better if we change how we approach these challenges.
And it starts with awareness, with understanding the issues, and knowing we can all be part of the solution.
So, to everyone listening, take a minute to think about what you've learned today. What can you do to be a part of this movement towards a better water future?
It could be something small, like watching what goes down your drain, or something bigger, like speaking up for change in your community. Everything counts.
And remember, every time you use water, there's a whole network of people and technology working to make sure we all have clean water for years to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.